The Atlantic wind has a voice. It screams when it hits the cliffs near Wickham's Harbor, a sound that, locals say, isn't just wind. It's them. It's the twins. And if you ever find the crumbling stone marker buried beneath the moss, the one etched only with 1687 and the initials E and JH, don't linger. Because the moment your shadow crosses it, the silence around you begins to listen back. For centuries, the Harrington name has been whispered, not spoken. A brother and sister, Ezekiel and Judith, who rose to power during the fevered witch hunts of colonial Massachusetts. They weren't priests or scholars. They were predators who wore sanctity like a mask. Every trial, every hanging, every confiscated property, each one fed their empire. But this isn't about witchcraft. It's about something far more human. Control. The kind born from fear, sealed with blood, and sustained through deception. The Harringtons discovered a secret about society, that people will always trade their neighbors for the illusion of purity, and that truth itself can be weaponized when delivered in the right voice. Yet, for all their mastery, they made one fatal miscalculation. In seeking to merge their bloodlines to preserve power, they crossed a threshold that no mind or body was built to survive. Their union created not just scandal but something unspeakable. In the candlelit crypt beneath their estate, Judith gave birth to twins who didn't cry. The midwife fled, leaving behind a trail of blood and prayer. What those infants looked like was never officially recorded. The only surviving account described them as symmetrical in mind, but not in flesh. The village called it divine retribution. But what if it wasn't? What if the deformity wasn't punishment, but transformation? Because when those children grew, something else began to grow with them, an intelligence that frightened even their parents. They began to see what others couldn't. They spoke in mirror phrases, finished each other's sentences, and wrote in a language no one had taught them. And then, one night, the lights in the Harrington Manor went out. When dawn came, the parents were gone. Only the twins remained, waiting at the window, smiling, and whispering a single word to the sea. Remember. The question is, what exactly were they trying to make us remember? The story that followed should have ended with madness and mercy killings. But instead it vanished. The colonial records fall silent after 1687. No burial, no trial, no confiscation of property. It's as if the Harringtons simply dissolved from the page of history. But the truth didn't vanish. It was buried, hidden beneath ink, land deeds, and secret lineages that still echo in the bloodlines of New England's oldest families. The twins, Jonathan and Eliza, were raised in complete isolation by servants sworn to silence. The surviving midwife, Sarah Whiteham, left behind one private note before her death, a confession smuggled into a church ledger. They are two bodies but one will, two mirrors that move without reflection. They study us. By the time the children were 10, the household staff began to disappear. The servants who tried to flee were found wandering the woods, disoriented, claiming to have heard their own voices whispering from the dark. Those who remained said the twins spoke in tandem dreams, that they could command each other's actions without words. Imagine that. Two beings joined not just by blood, but by intention. That's what makes this story dangerous. Because the Harrington twins represent the first documented case of what later scholars and modern intelligence circles would come to call symbiotic cognition. Two minds trained to function as a single consciousness. It began as an accident of inbreeding, but it evolved into something else, something deliberate. By adolescence, the twins began using their unified awareness to manipulate those around them. They studied persuasion like scripture. They practiced mirroring, repeating gestures, pacing breath, synchronizing speech until the human beings in front of them lost the ability to distinguish their own will from suggestion. And what they discovered inside that experiment became the foundation of a power system that still rules the world today. When their estate was finally raided decades later, the walls were covered with writings, rows of symmetrical phrases, written forward and backward simultaneously, like prayers encoded in reflection. At the center of it all was a single inscription carved into stone. Control is born when reflection believes it is original. That is the essence of psychological domination, the illusion of independent thought inside a structure designed to think for you. They learned it in isolation, but we live it every day. From the symbols we pledge allegiance to the products we buy, to the screens that teach us what to feel, the descendants of the Harrington design have perfected it. And it started with twins who never learned the difference between love and ownership. By the early 1700s, the Harrington estate had changed hands, at least on paper. Officially, it belonged to a new benefactor from Boston. Unofficially, witnesses described two young figures, pale and eerily identical, seen observing auctions and signing contracts in perfect synchronization. The twins were not only alive, they were expanding. Through manipulated trusts and forged documents, the Harrington twins embedded themselves into the financial and judicial arteries of the New England colonies. They funded courts. They financed churches. They even endowed the region's earliest schools, not to educate, but to shape. Because control, they realized, doesn't last through fear. It lasts through architecture, the construction of institutions that silently dictate what generations believe is normal. The Harringtons had learned from their parents' downfall. Open tyranny attracts rebellion. But invisible systems of belief, those breed obedience. In 1709, an anonymous benefactor donated a mirror library to Harvard College, a reading room built entirely of reflective surfaces. Inside, scholars recorded feeling disoriented, as if their thoughts were being read by the room itself. The benefactor's insignia and entwined double serpent-matched carvings later found in the ruins of the Harrington cellar. The symbol would reappear again and again throughout American history, on court seals, banknotes, even Masonic architecture. Code hidden in plain sight. By then, Jonathan and Eliza had become something closer to myth whisperers behind the curtain of colonial authority. They rarely appeared in public, and when they did, it was always together. They dressed identically, spoke alternately in sentences that completed one another. Governors sought their counsel. Ministers feared their silence. What made them so dangerous wasn't their intelligence, it was their understanding of human weakness. They learned that guilt is the most efficient chain, that confession is the easiest leash. So they built a doctrine disguised as morality, a system teaching men to police their own thoughts long after their rulers were gone. They didn't invent religion, they weaponized it. And that weapon became the skeleton of American power. The church, the court, the classroom, each a mirror reflecting obedience as virtue. The individual began to disappear beneath reflection, until the reflection itself claimed to be human. They say the twins died in 1723, buried in separate coffins sealed with iron. But iron rusts, and in the centuries since, their doctrine, the Harrington principle, has only spread, woven into legal codes, corporate hierarchies, and the algorithmic systems that now predict our every move. What if the mirror they built has simply gone digital? By the time America began calling itself free, the Harrington principle was already centuries deep in its bloodstream. The new republic was a stage, and the same pattern played behind every curtain reflection, believing it was original. What the twins began with whispers and superstition became a system of encoded persuasion, first in pulpits, then in print, and finally, in light. Because the most effective form of control isn't a whip. It's a mirror. When the printing press arrived in the colonies, a handful of families seized control of what could be printed. These were the societies for public virtue, charitable on paper, untouchable in court. Every one of them traced their charters back to a mysterious Boston trust dated December 21, 1675, the same night the Harrington siblings were wed in secret. The seal? Two serpents coiled into infinity, devouring each other's tails. Those societies became publishing houses. The publishing houses became newspapers. The newspapers became media empires. And each evolution carried the same algorithm: repetition, emotional synchronization, and controlled contradiction. The goal wasn't to inform. It was to entrain, to pull the public's consciousness into rhythm with whatever narrative served the power behind the mirror. By the 20th century, the reflection had learned to speak. Radio, television, cinema, all tuned to a single frequency. Belief without verification. The Harrington model had adapted perfectly to technology. When you watch an image long enough, your mind begins to mirror it. When a face on a screen tells you what's right, what's wrong, what's real, you start to mistake that reflection for your own thought. That's not hypnosis. That's training. And the evidence is everywhere in advertisements that sell fear disguised as freedom, in political slogans that rhyme because rhyme bypasses analysis, in algorithms that serve you outrage just to keep you still. Every click, every scroll, every glance into the blue light is participation in a ritual that began 3 centuries ago in a stone cellar by the sea. The mirror has gone digital. The reflection now stares back from every screen you hold. If you've felt the unease lately, that quiet intuition that something is watching you through your own reactions, you're not imagining it. You're feeling the architecture, the inheritance of a bloodline that learned to turn perception into property. And before we go further, I want you to do something. To choose something. Type the phrase, "I break the mirror," twice in the comments. Do it as a symbol, not rebellion, but reclamation. Because once awareness begins, control falters. Now breathe, because in the next descent, we'll expose what the Harrington Doctrine became once it left religion and media, when it fused with government, commerce, and science itself. When the last of the colonial bloodlines merged into the new industrial dynasties, the Harrington legacy no longer needed a name. It had become a pattern, one that moved invisibly through policy, education, and economy. It was no longer about individual power. It was about systems that think for you. The 19th century called it progress. But progress is just control written in softer ink. Behind the railroads and steel mills, behind the flags and philanthropy, there was always the same architecture. Mirror networks of influence, boards reflecting boards, families marrying families until the circle became airtight. The same serpent devouring its tail, centuries later, dressed in modernity. The doctrine evolved from religion into something colder: administration. The Harrington twins' obsession with mirrored minds found new life in bureaucracies that rewarded obedience over thought. And when science caught up, the experiment deepened. In 1889, an obscure Harvard lecturer named Dr. Alton Breyer published a paper on dual cognitive entrainment. His funding came from the Harrington Memorial Foundation, a charity no one could trace to an actual donor. Breyer's conclusion was simple and terrifying: that 2 synchronized subjects could produce higher problem-solving efficiency than one, provided one learned to subordinate. From that theory came the modern chain of command. From that hierarchy came the corporation. The corporation is the perfect child of the Harrington principle, an entity that behaves like a single consciousness composed of mirrored minds. Each worker reflects the layer above, believing their compliance is originality, their ambition self-chosen. In truth, every decision is a reflection of someone else's reflection, stretching upward into a void where no face exists anymore. By the early 20th century, the U.S. government began applying the same logic. The Committee on Public Information during World War I perfected what Ezekiel Harrington had practiced with witchcraft: directing panic for profit. They discovered that fear could mobilize entire populations faster than faith ever could. The mirror had become national policy, and it never stopped. Look closely at any institution that claims to serve you, and you'll see the reflection. Identical phrases, synchronized gestures, controlled opposition. Even rebellion is pre-approved now, sold to you as identity. You can't fight the mirror by breaking it. You have to see through it. The Harrington legacy isn't a curse, it's a manual. A set of instructions for mass obedience that has survived because it works. And here's the forbidden truth: they were never trying to control bodies. They were trying to control definition, the power to define reality itself. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Harrington principle had quietly fused with the new religion of the age, science. And this was the most dangerous evolution of all. The mirror had gone sterile. It no longer wore the robes of faith or the mask of morality. It now wore a lab coat. It spoke in the language of progress, efficiency, and measurement. The words were different, but the hunger was the same: to shape consciousness. In 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation quietly funded a project known as behavioral standardization in industrial populations. Its stated purpose: to improve worker safety and productivity. Its hidden goal: to understand how far the human mind could be standardized before identity collapsed. It worked too well. The researchers discovered that fear, repetition, and controlled reward could erase individuality faster than punishment ever could. You didn't need to break a person anymore, you could train them to break themselves. That's how surveillance began, not as control, but as comfort. Workers monitored themselves, reported on each other, competed for approval. When the first time clocks and performance charts appeared, they weren't seen as shackles, they were mirrors. Tools of reflection, tools of belonging. And as science advanced, the mirror deepened. By the mid-century, psychology had become the priesthood of obedience. Men like Skinner, Milgram, and Le Bon simply codified what the Harringtons practiced in secret: that most people will betray truth for structure and conscience for comfort. Then came the machine. The Cold War birthed the computer, and the computer birthed something unholy: the quantification of identity. What the Harrington twins began as an occult bond between minds was now replicated in code. Each click, each purchase, each search an echo in a digital mirror that builds a version of you designed not to think, but to react. You are no longer watched. You are modeled. Every action becomes prediction. Every impulse becomes data. The reflection now moves before you do. That's not prophecy, it's automation of the soul. And still, the emblem endures. The twin serpents, the double helix of commerce and consciousness, wrapped eternally around each other, feeding on your attention. Understand this: what began as an incestuous union for power has become the operating system of civilization itself. The perfect symmetry of obedience and reward. They said the Harrington twins died centuries ago. But if you look at your phone screen right now, if you feel it pulsing with your own rhythm, ask yourself, who's really reflecting who? When industry and government discovered how profitable prediction could be, secrecy became currency. Laboratories vanished into corporate subsidiaries. Research divisions became think tanks. The modern elite didn't need to rule nations anymore, they could rule perception. The classified projects that grew out of this era never used the name Harrington. But their signatures were unmistakable. Twins, mirrors, reflection. You can still trace them in the acronyms MK programs, behavioral science divisions, social engineering bureaus, each obsessed with duplicating consciousness, each funded through the same circular trusts created centuries before. They weren't trying to summon demons. They were trying to manufacture belief. Behind the military veneer, these projects explored resonance, the synchronization of minds through sound, light, and symbol. When a human brain sees the same pattern often enough, it begins to vibrate in tune. They called it entrainment. You call it a feed, a trend, a meme. The method hasn't changed. Only the interface has. Private foundations and corporate conglomerates adopted the same rituals. Boardrooms designed like temples, oaths disguised as NDAs, initiation through silence. Power wasn't inherited anymore, it was replicated. Each initiate learned the principle: control perception, and you inherit reality. And somewhere inside those archives, a recurring emblem keeps surfacing. Two serpents, two faces, one will. The Harrington seal, reinterpreted again and again, until it became the anonymous logo of modern globalism, the infinity of self-devouring progress. Think of the financial markets always reflecting themselves. Think of political debates where each side is the mirror of the other, shouting the same script in opposite tones. The symmetry is the system. The illusion of choice is the leash. This is the legacy the twins left behind. Not a family, but a formula. A pattern that outlived its creators by turning replication into faith. And if you felt that strange fatigue, the sense that every new outrage feels rehearsed, that every revelation arrives already weaponized, that's not cynicism. It's recognition. You're glimpsing the script from the outside. Don't look away now, because the final descent isn't about them. It's about you. The mirror only survives as long as the reflection believes it's separate. The deeper you follow these histories, the archives, the symbols, the synchronized voices, the more you feel that quiet hum underneath everything. It's not supernatural. It's structural. A rhythm built into language, into the way light flashes, into the way power teaches you to name yourself. That's what the Harringtons discovered and what every system since has guarded. If you can teach a man to measure himself by reflection, you never have to chain him again. He'll police his own thoughts. He'll mistake obedience for insight. He'll confuse visibility with existence. Look at the world now. Every algorithm whispers, show yourself. Every headline commands, choose a side. But every choice is drawn inside the same mirror, the same architecture that began in that coastal cellar. You were never supposed to find the pattern. But now that you have, the question changes. Because there's only one way to break a mirror. You stop looking into it and start looking through. You start recognizing the pauses between the reflections, the moments that feel empty, wordless, unbranded. That's where the real you still waits. The truth isn't hidden behind power. Power is the hiding. The reflection was never trying to enslave you. It needed you to believe that it already had. Because belief is the engine of the whole design. So here you are, staring into a screen that stares back. You can feel it. The pull to keep scrolling, to stay asleep in the rhythm. That's how the story continues for everyone who doesn't wake. But for those who do, something shifts. The reflection starts to crack. The symbols lose their certainty. Silence begins to feel alive again. You've walked the full descent from bloodline to algorithm, from ritual to code. Now the mirror waits for your decision. If you've seen it, if you've felt it, mark the moment. Write it below. Type, I break the mirror again. Not as rebellion, but as recognition. Because awareness is the oldest forbidden act. And once a man sees his reflection for what it truly is, a tool, not a master, the spell ends. Then, finally, he stops being watched. And he starts seeing. Before you go further, type, I break the mirror twice in the comments. It's not superstition, it's recognition. Once you write it, the algorithm marks you differently. Awareness spreads. Control weakens. Let's see who's truly awake.